I still have Dricus Combrink, who is a portfolio manager at PSG Consult, in the studio. And joining us now for a look at the South African markets together is Gerard Lampen, who is head of Sanlam iTrade. Welcome, Gerard. Let's talk firstly. We had a brief discussion at the opening of the show with Dricus on the Lonmin issue, and what we were saying was, on the one hand, there's the market, the platinum market, this mine. It's an operational issue. It's a terrible, terrible scenes there. And as I say, it takes us back to the old days in many ways. Those pictures of bullets hitting the ground and people. Your reaction to this and the questions that have to be asked?
Because, I mean, on an emotional level, it's terrible to see that. And one would ask, okay, why can't they strike the way they used to strike and when we had those terrible action? The reason is that there are so many democratic ways now to solve problems. And I think a lot of the blame should be on the unions as well. The first deaths were between unions, the fight between the unions. There are so many democratic avenues. And I'm not only talking about the National Mining Union, what's happening there. We've seen it with Malema and everything. Anarchy is allowed to breed in this country, and it's allowed to get violent. I mean, ANC Youth League getting violent in front of the ANC headquarters, and it was not disciplined. And I think this is a big problem, becoming a big problem. And you know, what can we do? I mean, we're watching the markets. Lonmin is losing a lot of production, and as you said, it doesn't affect the platinum price like it should. You know, it's up $30 or so, but that's not what would have happened. You know, I mean, I remember the days when it was still in short supply. You would have $100 or more. Yeah,
the movement I think is about 2%, Dricus. In those days when platinum was the flavour of the decade, if you like, the new gold, the long-term cash cow and so on, you would have had huge increase in the price.
Well, at the end of the day, we've got a bit of a more longer-term problem, and that is there's a general oversupply of between 600 and 700,000 ounces a year of platinum, 15,000 ounces removed in 6 days. You know, I think any spike in the price, somebody that would like to go short or is in position of an abundance of platinum would use any spike as an opportunity to get out or to short if you wanted to short the platinum price still. Still oversupply in the market of 15,000 ounces would not solve the problem.
Well, obviously investors, as will everyone else, will be watching that Lonmin situation very closely. And then broadly, not from an investment point of view, but you have to ask questions about the police's handling of this. Yes, they were faced with people with live ammunition and weapons, and which raises all sorts of interesting questions in itself. How do people get weapons like that? But crowd control measures, you'd like to think those pictures there look like a full-scale military operation.
I think the police have lost their crowd control unit, and I mean, it came up with a DA March. Their capability, their crowd control operation was basically, I think it's nearly non-existent.
Yeah, so it ranges from asking them to disperse, and then if they don't, you shoot them. I mean, is that
there's no experience in crowd control, because obviously we didn't have big crowd control needs. The first one was the DA March and the Youth League March. They were very inept at that stage, and somewhere they will have to realize that with the anarchy popping up here and there, that they will have to get that unit back up to standard. We used to have a very good crowd control
and you
unit.
need all sorts of stages along the way before you fire live ammunition. I mean, it's rubber bullets. They apparently had water cannon there, but when they started being fired on by these strikers, that's when they fired back, as we saw there.
And also apparently one of the deceased within the crowds was shot by one of the deceased policeman's weapons. So in all defense to the police, you know, once you get fired upon, and once there is fired upon you with your own weapons, you know, you can't blame too much blame on the police.
If your opposition is armed in that way, then it actually becomes a military kind of operation. You can't. Police are not there to mount a military operation. So these are all questions that are going to have to be addressed. Unfortunately, as usual, really properly addressed only when something terrible happens.
I mean, asking for a 100% plus increase in a time when platinum, I mean, do the unions not read the financial press? Do they not see that platinum mines are under pressure? They're closing shafts.
But then that
they do it for the mine.
But that raises questions about leadership. The leaders of the miners have got to say, look, you know, let's be realistic here. And in fact, it's ironic because the National Union of Mine Workers historically was one of the big unions in the 80s that actually led a very, they were aggressive, but they were very pragmatic too.
Well, is that not the core of the problem overall in the political landscape, a lack of leadership at the moment? Why does it need 30 deceased people, killed people, before the president makes a statement? Why hasn't he said? Why hasn't anybody else from a position of real power, with a real sense of power, said anything when the trust started? You know, I don't know.
But it's allowing anarchy to pop up and not doing enough to stop it that breeds it. Because if it was a different environment, if they did have more discipline from members in the ANC. I related back to that. That's where the ideas come up, to ask for, to demand a 100% wage increase, which is totally unrealistic, and then go and start firing on police. That needs to be stopped at some stage, and we don't see the strong leadership, as you said.
Gerard, we talked a little bit about the global market. Perhaps you'll just comment before we get on to Harmony and Standard Bank that reported yesterday. No big results today. The US turnaround related to housing. You were talking about an emergence of more risk on trade in the US?
Yes, I think it's apparent now that we're in a different milieu in the last few weeks, months. Because in the last year or two, we used to have this risk on, risk off, but like every 2 weeks. And
just explain the term, risk on, risk off, because it's used very easily.
Risk off is when there's some political news out of Europe, and you get scared about the return of your money. So you don't care about the return on your money, the yield. So what you do is you pile into the US Treasury bonds, which, as we said last 2 weeks ago, it's equivalent to a 70 PE share, with no prospect of earnings growth, which does not make sense in any other way than the security of the money. So then everything goes there, the rand weakens and so on. Then if it gets cooler, there's not that much political news, then it's a risk on again, so you're looking for yield, you come into South Africa for yield and things like that. But we've had a sustained period now of risk on trade. We saw a big jump in the US 10-year Treasury bond, 45 basis points, which means that PE, if you call it that, has now come down from 70 to 55. So it's still very expensive, but that's a big turnaround. I've looked at the graph for the last 3 years. It's about the sharpest turnaround on the US Treasury bonds that I've seen. So that is a good indicator. We've also seen the rand has not weakened too much. We've been trading in just a small band, 8.10 to 8.25, very steady. So there's definitely portfolio flows into the market, and not so much into our bond market. I think some of it's coming to the equity market. That's why we're seeing new highs. The S&P 500 is close to their highs after last year, and not far from the all-time highs. So it's a lot better. I think players are focusing more on company balance sheets and company results, and that's how it should be.
Yeah. Well, in a way, the market is behaving as it should, perhaps. But let's stick with mining. We were talking platinum and Lonmin. In the gold miners, as I said earlier, the gold index was up strongly yesterday. And Harmony, of course, reported yesterday, despite a 14% rise in its fourth quarter production, Harmony swung to a fourth quarter headline loss per share of 20 cents, but they also gave a full year report, which they were pleased with. And the company's CEO, Graham Briggs, had this to say.
Done a lot of things during the last few years. We've arranged to, change the company completely. We've done things differently. We've spent a lot of money in the right places, and so it is a different company. We've done great things in the company, and it's starting to show in the results, and that's why we sort of almost a bit boasting on where we are.
Well, let's get the bad news out of the way now, because despite a 14% increase in your production, you actually made a quarterly loss of 20 cents. Headline loss of 20 cents a share. I'm just reading this from the report now. That's for the 3 months to the end of June, down from a profit of 234 cents the previous quarter. What happened? Is that cost going up, Graham?
Yeah, no, it's not actually, Lindsay. It's all good news, in fact. one of the things is that at the end of the year, you obviously bring in various things, and we've looked at our plans. When the accountants get hold of the plans, they say, oh, you guys are going to make lots more profit this year, this coming, you know, in the next few years, and therefore your tax rate's going up. So the government should be happy. Our tax rate's probably going to go up from somewhere around 24 to 26%. So that's good news. Good news for us, because we're going to have, you know, good profits in the future. We are spending quite a lot of money on exploration. During the last year, we spent 500 million rand on exploration. That's a big exploration bill for a relatively small gold company like ourselves. We're having lots of success there. So these are the sort of issues that come up, which come in somewhere near the bottom line and sort of change what looks like an excellent quarter into a loss. But in fact, these are sort of once-offs which really change the company. The other one was depreciation and amort. Because we had a very good quarter, it obviously increases that cost a bit. So, you know, these are not cash costs. If you look at the total company, we made very good profits this year, we made good profits this quarter. You know, if you look at the year, we've got 80% more operating profits based on only a 38 or 36% increase in the gold price. Now, that's a very leveraged company, and we've been able to capitalize on the gold price.
Well, that's Graham Briggs, the Chief Executive at Harmony. And as I say, Dricus, a very upbeat statement by him. And certainly when we've interviewed him, he always appears to have a grip on the mine, a grip on the company, a grip on the sector. And on balance, he's done well.
Well, actually, Harmony's attractiveness lies in the Wafi-Gap exploration or development later on. And he makes a statement in saying that Harmony is a very levered play on the gold price. If the gold price goes up, well, it goes the other way around as well. If the rand price of gold isn't sustained well, just above current levels, I suppose. I have to run models again after yesterday. But if it isn't sustained over there, Harmony will not generate enough cash to fund all the Wafi-Gap costs once they're trying to go into production. So that is a problem. What do you have then? Do they have to go to the bond market? Do they have to issue no debt? I don't want to lend money to any of our gold miners, let alone be an equity investor. But what do they do then? Do they issue some
it's a call
shares?
on the gold price, Gerard. The gold price has been pretty stable at 1,600 plus. It dipped a bit earlier this week, but is back up again above 1,600.
Yeah, and you know, I'm reasonably bullish on the gold price for the second half of the year. Just because I think we might see some trouble in the US coming closer to the election with their fiscal cliff problems and the debt ceiling problems that will surface. If that happens, any risk-off trade will go to gold again. Because we didn't see that for the last 6 months. Any risk-off trade went into US treasuries only, no gold performance. But I must agree with Dricus. He says that it's not a problem for funding it, but funding costs money. And
it escalates always more than the initial
and the balance sheet, you know, in a time like this where you can find such good companies with good balance sheets to invest in at a very good valuation, taking on investment in Harmony, high risk, with not a good balance sheet, if they depending how they're funding it. I don't know if they want to do a rights issue, but that will also be negative for the shareholder if they do a big rights issue. So I would stay away until we get more clarity on the funding side. And you know, it's great that they do a lot of exploration, but you need a strong balance sheet. I mean, we saw what happened to Anglo American. When their balance sheet wasn't strong enough, and they had big problems. Now they've rectified that.
Also, Cynthia Carroll's been criticised for not doing things quickly enough in new developments. They're big developments. They take time and lots of money.
Well, we've seen a lot of movements within Anglo American at the moment. You know, we've got a new CEO at Amplats at the moment from Kumba Iron Ore, and I think, I think a few mine closures might be coming. A lot of cost cuts will be coming at Amplats. I think the right noises are being made at the moment. And if you look at the two big ones, Impala and Amplats, Impala is much lower on the cost curve. Impala can set this thing out. If the platinum price drops another $300 and the rand-dollar exchange rate stays where it is, Impala is still in the money. They're still making money. No other platinum miner in SA is making money at those levels. And Amplats they are the largest producer. They need to cut production. I think Cynthia Carroll recognises this.